Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Life as a Stormtrooper is not easy. It's something we talk a lot about on this channel because it seems like no one else is really talking about it. But how difficult life as a Stormtrooper is oftentimes depends on where you are stationed. For instance, if you're good at your job, you might be lucky enough to be stationed on the beautiful tropical world of Scarif. It's basically the Maldives, but across the entire planet. Just make sure you're not based too close to the Citadel Tower built by the Tarkin Initiative. It tends to attract friendly fire. But seriously, aside from the occasional orbital super laser strikes, Scarif wasn't really all that bad of a place to be. It was far removed from the front lines of the so-called rebel insurrection and well protected from space by a fleet of Star Destroyers and TIE fighters. Okay, you know what, maybe it's not the best place, but at least on Scarif, before you get vaporized, you can enjoy a pre-Death Star vintage Alderaanian wine while relaxing on the beach. If you really want to talk about great places to be posted, the best thing to do would be to avoid planets that take place in any novel or films. Also avoid making contact with Rebellion heroes. If you see a Rebellion hero, just run the other way. Also, same thing with Imperial heroes, avoid them as well. I also have a list of 5 planets specifically that I think you guys should avoid because, well, life just really sucks on these planets for a Stormtrooper. When you think of guerrilla fighters and partisans, the first word that comes to my mind at least is Twi'leks. They've been beaten down and oppressed and trampled upon by almost every faction in the galaxy. First there was the Separatist Alliance, followed by the Republic, and then eventually the Galactic Empire. But during this entire time, Cham Syndulla's Free Ryloth movement has been sharpening their teeth against the various invasion forces. Because of all their experience, they're considered one of the most dangerous and effective resistance groups in the entire galaxy. They were famously known for taking out an entire Imperial Star Destroyer with a handful of old Separatist droids, space mines, and a dozen or so operatives. Their goal on that mission was to kill the Emperor and Darth Vader, and they were pretty close to succeeding. And their whole idea was definitely a lot smarter than Luke's whole "I'm gonna turn myself in and hopefully Vader will become a good guy" approach. Anyway, besides the incredibly potent Free Ryloth movement, the planet was also extremely inhospitable and full of all sorts of large carnivorous monsters and beasts. And if that didn't kill you, the intense wind and weather that blew around the planet would. The ancient world of Jedha was home to some of the first Force users in the entire galaxy. Strewn across the planet's deserts were giant kyber crystal deposits and ancient temples of long-forgotten civilizations. It was a planet that had history and roots that surpassed the Galactic Empire and perhaps even the Old Republic. In the ancient city of Jedha, a chaotic mix of different religious groups, all worshipping the Force, populated the city streets, creating a tense and mystical atmosphere. Like Jerusalem, occasionally violence would erupt within the narrow streets of Jedha. When the Empire came for the planet's abundant stock of kyber crystals, Stormtroopers in their white gleaming armor found themselves patrolling the dangerous narrow alleyways of the old quarters and became easy targets of the various religious fanatics that populated the planet. And soon after, the extreme elements of the rebellion known as the Partisans also began ambushing Imperial patrols in the city streets. It's one thing to face your enemy in open combat. Stormtroopers excelled in these kind of fights, but it's a completely different scenario when your enemy is hiding amongst civilians and firing at you from the rooftops. Besides being an extremely barren world due to centuries of warfare, Mandalore was also home to a fierce, proud warrior people who hated having their freedom taken away from them. Although some Mandalorians like Clan Saxon joined forces with the Empire, not all Mandalorians welcomed Imperial rule. So the average Stormtrooper stationed on Mandalore oftentimes found themselves going toe-to-toe with some of the deadliest warriors in the galaxy. There are many reasons why Mandalorians are so dangerous, starting off with their culture. From a young age, all Mandalorians trained in various martial arts and learned how to use ranged weapons and studied battle tactics and strategies. Mandalorians were also extremely attached to their armor, which was made from Beskar, otherwise known as Mandalorian iron. This is one of the toughest materials in the entire galaxy and was capable of stopping multiple blaster shots. On top of that, most Mandalorians were heavily equipped not only with blasters, but with other non-lethal and very lethal options. Some even used jetpacks. As a Stormtrooper patrolling in the streets of Mandalore, you had many creative ways to die. For instance, a Mandalorian on a jetpack could come and pick you up and then drop you from several hundred feet in the air. Another option was that you could be melted in your plastoid armor by a wrist-mounted flamethrower. The Stormtroopers were mass-produced, cheaply designed soldiers. They really didn't do too well on worlds where the majority of the citizens were professional mercenaries. In the waning moments of the Clone Wars, the Grand Army of the Republic successfully drove the Separatist Alliance off the Wookiee world of Kashyyyk. Shortly after, the Chancellor became the Emperor and then turned his clone troopers against the Wookiees and enslaved the entire world. The Empire found that the Wookiees would rather die than become slaves, but they did find that by inserting inhibitor chips in their brains, they were much more easier to control. As an added measure, they also kidnapped Wookiee babies and younglings for hostages. The Empire also blockaded the planet, making it relatively hard for Wookiees to escape. But that didn't mean they had complete control of the planet. There were still certain ports and cities where independent travelers and traders could do business. Although these were relatively free areas, Stormtroopers still had to regularly patrol them. But after numerous incidents where Stormtroopers began disappearing, the Empire mandated that patrols had to be carried out by 2 or more Stormtroopers at one time. But in reality, even 2 Stormtroopers really didn't stand a chance against a small mob of Wookiees ready to tear them into 1,000 pieces. On top of that, the world of Kashyyyk was incredibly dangerous, even for a Wookiee. Most Wookiees didn't dare venture below the 4th layer of their force. That's where giant insects, predators, and other monsters crawled around. It was so dark and dangerous on the forest floor of Kashyyyk that no sentient being had ever been down there before. So despite what the Empire thought, they really didn't have any control over Kashyyyk. Jakku was one of the most desolate and deserted planets in the galaxy, and the final resting place of the Imperial Navy, along with the Stormtrooper Corps. In the waning days of the Empire, after being ruthlessly chased by both New Republic forces and Emperor Palpatine's vicious contingency plan, the remaining strength of the Imperial Navy gathered on this small desert planet, waiting for one final showdown. With their supply lines cut and desertion at an all-time high, the Stormtrooper Corps began falling apart. Regulations and orders began completely disappearing, and Stormtroopers began painting their helmets and doing all sorts of crazy things. It was a sad day for the Stormtrooper Corps. The once proud men in white became savages. They started turning against each other, fighting for what little resources that were left. But in the final days, as the Battle of Jakku started and Republic forces closed in on the Stormtroopers, they remained and fought with such tenacity and anger that they almost drove the Republic off planet. It wasn't until Imperial Superstar Destroyers began crashing onto their positions that the infamous Stormtrooper Corps of the Galactic Empire finally began to break. Morior Invictus. Well guys, that's our list of the worst worlds to be stationed on as a Stormtrooper. As a general rule, because of how large the Galactic Empire was and how spread thin its forces were, Stormtroopers oftentimes found themselves outnumbered by Imperial citizens, some who occasionally wanted to shoot them. If you really have to choose a world to be a Stormtrooper on, I highly recommend you look for something in the core world region near the Imperial Center on a pro-Imperial world. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and like us on Facebook, and a special thanks to all you Patreon supporters out there. Now, whether you're a flight technician or a sergeant in the Corps, or you're a cadet straight out of the academy, don't forget, if you suspect that one of your neighbors or loved ones or family members are an alien or non-human scum, report them. #HumanityFirst. Thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.